Hello, this is Jim Phillips. What you're about to hear was recorded live on October 26, 2010. It is a radio interview that I conducted of two brand new first-time users of the PAL system. This delightful couple experienced the PAL system for the first time on February 5th and 6th, 2010. I think, in many ways, for people who are being introduced to these unique concepts for the first time, they are a better spokesman than I am. You see, people look at me as some kind of tough guy who's been doing these kinds of things for decades, that somehow I'm different than they are, and that these things just won't work for them. Well, let's see what you think after watching this program.
Good evening. This is Jim Phillips, your host of the Safe Harbor Alliance Self-Reliant Living Show. In this evening, I have a very special guest with me, as I always do, and I appreciate these people that take time out of their schedule to come in and just visit with us and share some of their experiences. Tonight, we're talking about a topic that's really kind of at hand right now since winter's on its way, and the concept is this, winter happens. In fact, it happened last year. It's happening this year. It's going to happen again next year. And sometimes emergencies happen, and sometimes these emergencies happen in winter. Are you prepared to survive a winter without heat or without any number of resources you might normally have? So tonight we're going to be talking about that with Jim and Connie Cheney, and I consider them to be very special spokesmen for what we're going to be talking about. You folks had some unusual experiences really this last year. And you spent some time up on a mountain ridge in the cold overlooking this beautiful valley that we were camped on. And as a matter of fact, I remember with some of the people when I was leading them up there, and we went right up on top of this ridge in an exposed area outside of the trees where the snowdrifts are piling up. And there were a few people when I stopped there, they were looking and they were like down at the trees and over the side in there, and they're going like, aren't we going down there? And the answer is, well, no, we're not. And that was unusual because usually you look for a more sheltered place. In our case, we chose a very unsheltered place because sometimes you may not be in the best of circumstances. This is up Logan Canyon in northern Utah, overlooking Middle Sinks on the west, and to the east overlooking Bear Lake Valley. And that's where we chose to spend some time up there. Let me ask you, Jim, a couple of questions. You had a little bit of, I'll say, some cold weather experience like most people do when you're growing up, and we all go outside and shovel some snow, and maybe we ski or do a few little things. And you grew up in southeastern Idaho where it's rather cold, and so you had some experiences early on with cold weather. Describe some of that, and because you know what cold weather is like and you know what it feels like to be cold.
Okay. A lot of people don't believe that southeastern Idaho could get that cold, but I saw temperatures that were between 55 and 60 below zero in January. And growing up in that, you obviously didn't spend tremendous amount of time outside without something over you to protect you. And growing up, I had a paper route, which I did summer and winter, and it was a several-mile paper route. And I had probably what was barely adequate clothing at the time even. And I know that often I'd come home and I'd get home about time to just head off to school, and I would then walk to school. And I was only a mile away from the school, so it wasn't that far. But I remember going into the restroom and putting my hands under water to get them functioning again so that I could go to class and actually use a pencil. That kind of environment was, I just kind of got used to that. It was just you outside, you hurt a lot, and then you come inside and hurt some more when you warm up.
And sometimes, we just come to expect in the winter, cold is the norm, and if you're going to be outside, you have to expect to, I'll say, suffer a little bit. It may be unpleasant, and you go inside to warm up. So you had experience growing up, and then later on, you've done a little bit out in the cold. I mean, besides just shoveling snow, you've been outside a little bit.
Sure.
You've had some experience with it, and you know what it feels like. Now, Connie, let me ask you, what was your cold weather experience prior to this ridge?
Well, actually, it was very little. A number of years ago, I did ski some, and even more years than that, I did some sledding. But I was a fair weather skier. The sun had to be shining, and as soon as I got cold or wet, it was time for me to head for the car and some hot chocolate. So I don't like to be cold.
So you wouldn't classify either one of you as a winter camping, freak, or you didn't look for winter to come around and decide we're going to go out there and spend a day or two or three or go someplace and build snow houses or igloos or anything like that. That wasn't your normal behavior, let's say, a couple of years ago. Would that be correct?
Oh, heavens no.
Yeah, I would say that, while I've camped out in the winter, it was like, let's see how big we can make the fire, and so we can at least have one half of us warm.
Right. It's the old experience, playing the game of rotisserie. You stand around the fire and you just kind of slowly rotate around so that each side of you is eventually getting warm, but, of course, each side of you is also getting cold, and that was kind of the normal winter camping experience. Now, tell me what introduced you or how you became introduced to the concept of going outside in the winter, or certainly being ready to deal with cold and winter. What introduced you to that?
Well, Connie and I are very preparedness-minded, and for some time we had solved nearly everything, but the prospect of keeping the house warm in the wintertime and staying warm was a problem, and we didn't really have a really great solution. We had some solutions, but they didn't really go all the way. They weren't the most ideal solutions, and we weren't sure they would actually work in case it really was necessary. And so I heard about you, and I thought, this is intriguing. Let's see what he has to say.
So you came to some of these classes a little while back. When did you start coming to some of the classes I was doing?
We were thinking about that about 2006, and we started coming and thought it was an interesting concept and it's something we need to do something about. Unfortunately, due to some things beyond our control, we weren't really able to do something, get real into it, as you would, and get started on it. Well, when it finally came around the time where we could actually do something about it, then we moved ahead.
Yeah, you came to some of these classes for over 3 years and listened to some strange concepts, something that's different than what most people do. So you got concerned about or interested in cold weather and winter simply because things happen in winter. They could happen, and you were not 100% sure that you had a solution to staying warm, whether it's in a house or someplace else. And I think that's where a lot of people are. You hope you know what the answer is, but how do you find out? And of course, one of the ways you find out is you go out and stay in the worst conditions you can find, and if you can handle the worst conditions, then if you're at home and don't have any heat, that's going to be easy, or other situations like that.
And storing up fuel didn't seem to be a realistic possibility.
For a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a month or so. Maybe even one season you could do that, but what if you get into something that extends, multi-year for whatever reason, and you just don't have the comforts that we normally have right now?
Yeah.
Now, you got serious about making, and I'll just introduce something right here because we haven't talked about it, and this is what comes out of the classes. Winter Without Worries is the title of the class that I teach. And within it, we have this concept that we entitle PALS, P-A-L-S, which is an acronym for Phillips Arctic Living System. And within the PALS system is the PALS clothing, using a technology, using an approach that is different than just going down to the store and buying your typical layers and things like that. I'll talk about that at another time, so we won't go into that very deeply right here, other than what some of your experience has been and how it works. But it's not a layered system. It's a mono-layered system, and there's some things that are very unique about it and different that you just don't see anyplace else. Okay, so you came to classes, you listened to this, and then you got serious about making your own PALS clothing. Why did you do that? That's a lot of work, actually. So why did you do that? And I have an idea of some of the time that you put into it, and Connie put a lot of time into that. So both of you, why did you want to do that?
Well, the first thing I did is I bought a set of the thinner thermal johns, and I tried those out and was excited that they really actually worked for the kind of things that I was doing, going out in the yard and working in the yard, shoveling snow, stuff like that. And it worked much better than my other winter clothing, which I thought was pretty decent. And so then I said, well, that worked. Let's take the next step and let's see how much better that is.
Okay, now, Connie, at this time, you actually hadn't had any experience with inner thermal liners or the thermal johns at this point, had you? The thinner, the half-inch thick, is that correct?
That's right. I hadn't. I was basically just going on faith that what you were teaching was correct. However, I did think you were a little strange and probably had a higher tolerance to pain and cold than I did. That you could say, because you would always say, you can do this, you can go out. We'd see pictures, we'd hear stories about the places that you would go and test out the PALS system, and that you could stay warm and dry. And I think, well, I believe you, but I think that you just are less sensitive to the cold and pain than I would be.
I'm just a tough guy, right?
Yeah.
In spite of the fact that I point out I'm really a bigger wimp than probably anybody in the room.
Well, you say that, but, it's still hard to believe.
Okay, I understand. So you hadn't had any experience, but you did observe. I remember you telling me about what you observed when Jim was using some of this basic technology, this clothing, this thermal johns. It was different, using it as a insulated undergarment that went underneath regular clothing. And tell me about your observation there, what you started to see with him. And, Jim, if you comment a little bit more about when you say it was better, what do you mean it was better?
Well, it was very interesting because he put it on and he'd go out to shovel the snow, and I'd go out and check on him, and I'd say, how you doing? Are your toes cold yet? And he'd say, no, they're just warm. And I'd say, well, aren't you ready to come in yet? No, I'm not cold. And it was just quite amazing because he doesn't like cold weather either, and that had never happened before. He'd always get cold. So it was interesting to see that there was something different with what he was doing.
And not only that, usually when I came in after shoveling snow like that, all my clothes would be just soaked through. I came in, I was dry on the inside, and that's something we noticed immediately. That was like, wait a minute, this is really different.
Yeah, and one of the things that's very different about the way we do things is moisture management. Frankly, it's very easy to insulate. As far as insulating and trapping heat, that's easy to do. You can do it with all kinds of different materials, and you can even do it with, in survival situations with all kinds of simple things like wadded up newspaper. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. Everything has its, drawback in those cases. But the real magic, if you will, and the real performance comes from how you can manage moisture. It's about managing moisture. Moisture is a real problem, and it can build up in clothing, and it can be a very serious problem over an extended period of time. Anybody can go outside and play in the snow for an hour or two and come inside and you're okay. What if you have to stay out there all day? Or what if you're out there for 3 or 4 days? What if you're out there for weeks on end? So moisture management, that was something you were starting to observe. And what I appreciate about having you and others talk about this is, because I know for years people look at me and they'll say like, okay, tough guy, weird guy, or maybe he knows some tricks that none of us can learn, or he's just willing to put up with pain or whatever it is. And that's just not the way it is. Actually, there's a performance difference that is spectacular is what it comes down to. It lets you do some unusual things. Well, let's talk a little more about that. So you started to see some experience. You were hearing stories, and then you played with a little bit of one of I call it the downgraded system, you will. It's not an Arctic system, and it's not going to let you go outside and live for extended periods of time. So you were getting a little bit of experience with some things like that, and then that's when you really committed here a year ago to build the clothing. You were going to build it yourself, and that's one of the things I want people to understand. You can make these things if you wish to. There's a lot of work involved in it, but you can produce it, and that's what we've done throughout the years. Now, you went to Snow College. Let me explain that to people for just a moment. And I spell that SNOCOLLEGE, Snow College. You went to the basic training that we did a year ago in February. And not only did you go once, but you went 2 times.